Lost memories, lost time, the art of forgetting, the art of
The Archivist of Disappearing Memories, Accession. The last job I did as a librarian was to throw things away. Not books, not really. The city would never have forgiven us for tossing paper. We got rid of hard drives, obsolete ones, and not obsolete enough. Laptops with swollen batteries, thumb drives found in returns, a single cracked phone sealed in a plastic bag like a fish in formaldehyde. A box of VR headsets left behind after a future of learning pilot that ended the way pilots often do, with grant paperwork and a press photo, then silence. All of it went into what we called deaccession, a word that sounded gentler than weeding or discarding. Deaccession was a ritual. You documented, you tagged, you wiped, you certified, a chain of custody for objects that had no business outliving their owners but always did. Because memory isn't private anymore, not once you let it leak into devices. It's not even yours in the way you think it is. It's your eyes' timestamps, your location pings, your photos' faces, your headset's gaze tracking, your voice assistant's transcripts, your sleep tracker's dream score. It's the shadow of you, faithful and faithless at once. I left the library after I testified in a case where a teenager's life log was used to paint her as reckless, and a jury nodded like they'd met her. I'd watched her sit very still while strangers projected a narrative onto her data the way we used to project stories onto marginalia. I went home that night and took my own phone apart on the kitchen table, laying it out like a body, battery, SIM. A wafer of memory no larger than a fingernail, holding more of my life than my mother's entire attic. I became what people now call a cognitive rights investigator, which is an ugly phrase for a simple task. I look for what's missing. Sometimes it's missing people, sometimes it's missing consent. Increasingly, it's missing time. The office I rent sits above a shuttered copy shop and across from an urgent care clinic that advertises IV drips for brain fog. The neighborhood is full of places that promise to optimize you, your hormones, your attention, your gut microbes, your grief. The windows are all tinted, as if suffering were indecent. On a Tuesday that smelled like hot pavement and disinfectant, a man came in and asked me to find his year. He was in his 40s maybe, but his face had the unsettled smoothness of someone who spent too long in simulated light. He carried no bag, no folders. Just a thin ring on his left hand and a small object he rolled between his fingers like a worry stone. When he put it on my desk, I recognized it immediately. A VR retreat token, the kind some wellness enclaves used instead of keys. This one was matte black and slightly warm, as if it had been held for a long time. "Miss Vale?" he asked. I'd stopped correcting people years ago. I wasn't a Ms. anything at the library. I was a badge and a set of hands. Now I was a name on a door. "Yes," I said. "Mara Vale." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since the hallway. "My name is Elliot Park. I need you to tell me what happened to 2021. Most people come in with a story, a suspicious partner, a brother who won't return calls, a parent whose online banking looks wrong. They bring a narrative and want me to verify it." Elliot brought a blank page. "It's gone," he said, as if we were talking about a lost wallet. "I remember 2020. I remember 2022. I remember the pandemic the way everyone does, through screens and sourdough starters and that strange collective dread." His voice tightened. "But 2021, it's a corridor with no doors." "You mean you don't remember specific events?" I said carefully. "Or you don't remember anything at all?" "Nothing. I have facts. My tax return exists. I can see deposits and rent payments. There are photos of me at a beach with people I don't recognize, doing a smile that looks rehearsed. He made a small, involuntary movement with his hand, like swiping a notification away. But there's no me there, no continuity. It's like a book where someone has cut out an entire chapter and the glue is still tacky. I watched him, not in the way cops watch for lies, but in the way librarians learn to watch for misunderstanding. In my old job, confusion could be tragic in small ways. A patron misreading a medication leaflet, a child struggling with a form, an elderly man asking for the book with the blue cover when he meant the one with the blue spine. Elliot's confusion had edges like a wound. "Any head injuries?" I asked. He shook his head quickly as if he'd rehearsed this. "No concussion, no stroke, no seizures. My MRI is clean, my blood work is boring. I'm not depressed, not dissociated, not suffering from fugue states." He paused. "At least not according to the people I've paid to look." "You've seen a neurologist?" "Two, a memory clinic, a psychiatrist." "And what did they say?" He gave me a look I've learned to fear in clients, the look of someone who's been given language that doesn't fit. They said it might be functional amnesia, stress-related. That memory retrieval can be blocked without structural damage. They asked if something terrible happened in 2021 that I can't bear to remember. Did it? His face did something subtle, like a page turning to a paragraph he couldn't read. "I don't know," he said. "That's the problem." The token sat between us like a punctuation mark. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. His fingers hovered over it, then pulled back. "I found it in a drawer in my kitchen, next to a travel-sized bottle of lavender oil. The drawer is for junk, batteries, rubber bands, old takeout menus. I don't use lavender oil." He swallowed. "The token has a logo. I searched it." "And?" "Vastlands. A contemplative VR retreat for letting go. They shut down 2 years ago. The site is dead. The forum is gone. But I found cached copies, testimonials." He looked at me, and for the first time there was something like embarrassment. "I found a waiver." "Signed by you." He nodded once sharply. "I don't remember signing it," he said, "but it has my signature, and I don't forge myself. Some people come to me because they think they've been hacked. Elliot came because he suspected he'd been edited. I picked up the token. It was smooth, with a slight indentation where a thumb would rest. The logo was an empty circle, a brushstroke that didn't quite connect. Emptiness as branding, of course. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He looked past me at the wall behind my desk where I'd pinned a print of a 19th century library card catalogue. The drawers in the picture were half open, like teeth. "I want you to find my year," he said, "and I want you to tell me whether I gave it away." Provenance. There's a kind of arrogance in believing your life can be stolen. Most thefts are messy. They leave fingerprints. They leave you enough memory of what you lost to grieve it. But in the last 5 years, I'd taken on 3 cases like Elliot's, and each of them had taught me the same unsettling thing. Sometimes a year can vanish so cleanly you don't even know what shape it had. The first was a woman who insisted she'd never been pregnant, though her medical record said she'd given birth. The baby existed, an 8-year-old with her nose and a birth certificate to match. The woman loved him fiercely, she said, but he felt like a relative's child left on her doorstep. "I can pack his lunch," she told me, fingers clenched around a paper cup of water, "but I can't remember my body being a home." The second was a man who was certain he'd never lived in Taiwan, though his passport stamps argued otherwise, and his Mandarin had the fluid cadence of someone who'd used it daily. "I can argue about rent," he told me with a humor that tasted like ash, "but I can't remember the sound of my own footsteps there." In each case, neurologists shrugged. Psychiatrists offered diagnoses that sounded like weather: dissociation, repression, stress, and each client, without knowing the others, described the same sensation. Not a fog, not confusion, but an absence with clean borders. Like a section of shelves in a library that had been removed and the wall painted over. "Vastlands," I repeated. "You said it was a VR retreat." Elliot nodded. "They called it voluntary forgetting, like Like you could declutter your mind. I'd heard the phrase before in a different context. There were clinics that offered memory dampening for trauma, and there were psychedelic therapy centers that promised to rewrite your narrative. There were apps that gamified exposure therapy, and neurofeedback studios where people paid to watch their own brainwaves like an aquarium. Voluntary forgetting was newer, and it had the slickness of a product category no one had regulated yet. Where was it? I asked. He hesitated. That's the thing, I can't find a location. The cached site talked about a remote environment and a sanctuary outside ordinary time. There was a mailing address for legal notices, a P.O. box in Mendocino County. And you don't remember traveling there? No. I opened a notebook and wrote, Vastlands/Mendocino P.O. box/token. My notes still look like a librarian's, even though I haven't shelved a book in years. I can't help it. I believe in metadata. I believe that if you write something down in the right place, it will behave. Tell me about your life, I said, not your missing year, the years around it. What was your work? Who were you? He blinked as if I'd asked him to recite a password. I'm a systems engineer, he said, not VR network security. I worked for a mid-sized firm that got acquired. In late 2020, I was burned out. He gave a small laugh that had no joy in it. Everyone was burned out. I was also practicing meditation. I got into Buddhism through an app, which is ridiculous, I know, but it helped. He faltered. You wanted relief, I said. He nodded. And then 2021 is gone. Yes. He leaned forward. If I did this to myself, I need to know why. I looked at him and thought of the librarian's dilemma. The patron who asks for a book that will hurt them, and your job is to put it in their hands anyway. You understand, I said slowly, that finding out what happened might mean remembering. I understand, he said, and his voice was steady in a way that sounded like fear. I slid the token back to him. Leave this with me, I said, and sign a consent form. I don't do memory work without documentation. It's the one habit I refuse to drop. He signed with a hand that didn't shake. When he left, I sat alone with the quiet hum of the building's old air conditioner and stared at the empty circle logo. It looked less like a brand and more like a vow. I made a list the way I used to when we got a donation of unsorted boxes. Triage, then catalog. Verify Vastlands existed as a legal entity. Locate staff or former participants. Determine whether the missing years were connected to VR sessions. Find out what voluntary forgetting meant in practice. And, in smaller handwriting, like a note to myself, determine whether the year is gone or merely misfiled. Reference desk. The easiest way to investigate a secret is to assume it wasn't meant to be secret at first. People hide things poorly in the beginning. They build websites. They file LLC paperwork. They buy domain names. They post job listings. They brag. I spent the afternoon doing what I'd done for most of my adult life, sitting in front of a screen and asking questions that had answers. Vastlands Retreat, LLC dissolved. Registered agent, a law office in Oakland. P.O. box in Mendocino. Business purpose, wellness services. I searched for news coverage. A few glossy lifestyle articles from the year before it shut down, the kind that described digital detox retreats that used more technology than a data center. One photo showed a row of people in white linen sitting on cushions, each wearing a lightweight headset that looked like an elegant blindfold. The article mentioned guided immersion environments, somatic feedback, neuroscience-informed mindfulness. It didn't mention forgetting. I dug deeper, cached forum posts, a handful of reviews, a thread titled, "Did anyone else lose time?" The posts were old, but the tone was familiar, anxious, lonely, half embarrassed. I left feeling lighter, but also like I can't remember the week there. Is that normal? They said it's part of integration. They told me not to journal during the program because it would anchor narrative. Is that legit? I took screenshots and saved them with file names that made sense to no one but me. Vastlands_forum, underscore time loss underscore 01.png. At 6, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. After the beep, a woman's voice said, Mara Vale. My name is Sana Roy. Someone gave me your name. I'm missing 14 months. Please call me back. I played it twice, then sat very still. 14 months. The number felt deliberate, like a measurement rather than a metaphor. I called her back. She answered on the second ring. Thank you, she said immediately, as if she'd been bracing herself for rejection. I didn't know who else to call. How did you get my name? I asked. A support group, she said. For people with memory gaps. I didn't even know that was a thing until I found myself in it. Tell me, I said, and I heard my old reference desk voice, calm, encouraging, making space. Sana's missing time spanned late 2020 through early 2022. She'd been a graduate student, then suddenly she had a job she didn't remember applying for. She had friends whose names were in her phone with heart emojis beside them and no corresponding feelings in her body. She had a tattoo on her shoulder, 2 lines forming an incomplete circle that she'd discovered in the mirror like a stranger's mark. The doctors say I'm fine, she said, and her words came fast, like she'd memorized them. They say it's stress, it's burnout, it's depression, it's anything. But I remember my depression. This isn't that. This is empty shelves. I closed my eyes. Did you ever attend a VR retreat called Vastlands? I asked. There was a silence that wasn't confusion, but something like recognition. I have a token, she whispered. Black, warm, like it remembers me when I don't. After I hung up, my office felt smaller, as if the air itself had been catalogued. 2 clients, same token, same brand. Not a coincidence. Not anymore. I did what I always do when my instincts flare. I went looking for expertise. There was a clinic downtown called the Cognitive Liberty Center, a sleek place with frosted glass and a waiting room that smelled faintly of chamomile and ozone. They'd hired a neuropsychologist I'd spoken to once in a prior case, Dr. Lena Salazar, who had a way of explaining brain science without turning people into diagrams. When I emailed her, she replied within 10 minutes, "Come by tomorrow. Bring whatever you have." The next morning, I walked into her office with my screenshots, Elliot's consent form, and Sana's voicemail transcribed in my notebook. Old habits die the way mountains do, slowly by shedding grains. Dr. Salazar listened without interrupting. Her office was spare except for a small stone bowl on her desk filled with paper cranes. When I finished, she leaned back and tapped her pen against her teeth. Whole years, she said. Clean borders. No neurological insult. She stared at the wall for a moment. This reminds me of functional retrieval blockade. Meaning the memories exist, I said, but can't be accessed. She nodded. Think of the hippocampus as an indexer. It binds together the elements of an episode, the smell of sunscreen, the sound of a voice, the feeling of sand, the concept of, this is my life. Later, when you want to remember, you don't pull up the entire memory directly. You activate a cue, and the hippocampus helps reconstruct the pattern in the cortex. Pattern completion. So, if the index is damaged, I began. Not damaged, she corrected gently, reassigned or suppressed. You can have intact engrams, memory traces, without effective retrieval. There's research in animals where you can silence an engram with optogenetics and then reactivate it. Humans aren't there with light, but we have other ways of modulating memory systems. Like drugs, I said. Propranolol. Yes. Her eyes sharpened. Beta blockers can reduce the emotional intensity of a memory if administered during reconsolidation, when the memory is reactivated and becomes labile. The key is the reconsolidation window. The brain doesn't store memories like files. Every time you recall, you rewrite. I thought of Elliot's photos, him smiling at a beach, expression rehearsed, a rewritten smile. And VR, I said, because it seemed unavoidable. Dr. Salazar nodded slowly. VR is excellent at eliciting reactivation. If you can recreate the sensory context, visual, auditory, even olfactory, you can trigger the memory network. Combine that with neuromodulation, TMS, TDCS, or more recently transcranial focused ultrasound, and you can influence the hippocampal cortical dialogue. I felt my skin prickle. Ultrasound can reach the hippocampus. In low intensities, yes, it's still emerging, but there are trials. It's not like blasting tissue, it's modulation. You can entrain rhythms, alter excitability. She hesitated. And with closed-loop systems, where you detect brain state in real time and stimulate accordingly, you can time interventions to when the memory network is most plastic. Closed-loop, like a feedback system, like a thermostat for identity. You're saying, I said, it's possible someone could design a program where people re-experience parts of their life in VR, and then their brains are encouraged to let go. Dr. Salazar's mouth tightened. Possible, yes. Ethical. That depends on consent, on what exactly is being altered, and on whether you can reverse it. And if you couldn't reverse it, I said, it would be very bad, she finished quietly. And it would attract exactly the sort of people who think suffering is a bug instead of a signal. I thought of the empty circle logo, a signal of absence. Voluntary forgetting, I said. Have you heard that term? Dr. Salazar frowned. Only in cognitive psychology, as a laboratory paradigm, directed forgetting. You tell participants to forget a list, and they show reduced recall, but that's not erasing, it's a retrieval strategy. What about retreats? I asked. That promise it as a service. Her eyes narrowed. Wellness has always flirted with unethical neuroscience, neurobabble cells. But whole years, that suggests something systematic, something prolonged. I spread the screenshots on her desk. Vastlands, I said. They're defunct now. I'm trying to find out what they did. She studied the logo, then the photos of people in headsets. The headsets are interesting, she said. Those aren't consumer units. They look like custom rigs, lightweight, with side modules. Could be for EEG or eye tracking, or both. Eye tracking, I repeated, for foveated rendering. That too, but eye tracking is also a proxy for cognitive state. Pupillary response correlates with arousal. Saccade patterns can indicate dissociation. If you wanted to detect when someone's memory is engaged, you'd track eyes. I felt the way I used to feel when a patron asked me for a book I didn't have. An itch that meant I had to find it anyway. How do you lose a year without losing everything else? I asked. Dr. Salazar tapped the pen against her desk. Context, she said. Autobiographical memory is organized around context cues. Places, people, routines. If you can decouple a segment of memory from its usual retrieval cues, it becomes inaccessible. Not erased, just floating. Like a book with no call number, I thought. In a library, it would be lost. In a mind, it would be a ghost. She looked at me. Mara, what are you going to do if you find these memories? It wasn't a rhetorical question. She meant it ethically. I thought of Elliot's steady fear, Sana's empty shelves, the mother who couldn't remember carrying her child. I don't know, I admitted. But I don't think it's right that someone else decided they shouldn't have the choice. Dr. Salazar's gaze softened. Choice is the whole point, she said. In Buddhism, too. I blinked. You practice? She smiled faintly. I sit when I can. The brain is impermanent. Suffering is inevitable. But there's a difference between letting go and being stripped. On the way out, she handed me a small printed article. Read this, she said. It's about hippocampal neuroprostheses, memory encoding models. It's not exactly your case, but it'll remind you that memory is not just storage. It's architecture. If someone built a retreat around forgetting, they would have needed an architect. I took the paper. The title made my stomach drop, though it was just academic jargon. Mnemonic indexing and externalized recall, a framework for autobiographical memory transfer. Transfer, not erasure, relocation. As I stepped back into the bright, indifferent sun, I felt the case shift in my hands like a box whose contents had rearranged themselves. Shelf life. By the time I drove up to Mendocino County, fog had colonized the coastline like a quiet coup. The P.O. box address led nowhere useful, as expected. Mail forwarding services, paper shields, but permits are harder to hide. So are electrical bills. So are the sort of supply shipments that wellness retreats can't live without. Food, linens, tech equipment. I spent 3 days making calls and filing requests, and I leaned on old librarian skills, polite persistence, the ability to ask a question in a way that makes the other person feel helpful instead of defensive. Eventually, a woman at a rural utilities office, tired, amused, told me there had been a property with unusual power consumption on the edge of a state forest. Like a Bitcoin mine, she said, but with more incense. They called it a meditation place. What was the address? I asked. She hesitated. You didn't get it from me, she said, and then she told me anyway. The road to Vastlands was not dramatic. No switchbacks, no gated entrance with a security guard. Just a long stretch of asphalt that turned into gravel, then dirt, then a narrow path between redwoods that looked too maintained to be wild. I drove slowly, not because I was afraid of being seen, but because the trees made me feel like I was entering a place that had been waiting. At the end of the path, the retreat appeared with the disorienting plainness of something built by people who believed they were above aesthetics. A cluster of low buildings, cedar siding turned grey. A larger structure that might have been a hall, and behind them, a separate outbuilding with no windows and a thick cable conduit running into the earth. The kind of building you'd use for servers or secrets. I parked at the edge of the gravel lot and sat for a moment, listening. No birds, just wind and the faint, constant hum of something still drawing power. Defunct, my ass, I thought. The air smelled like damp wood, and something faintly sweet. Sandalwood, maybe. Or memory of it. I walked toward the main hall. The door was locked, but the lock was old and cheap. I didn't pick it. I didn't have to. The frame had warped from moisture, and with a hard shove it gave way with a groan like a tired body. Inside, the hall was stripped. No cushions, no art, just bare floorboards and a lingering scent of smoke. But the walls had marks. Rectangular patches where something had hung. Posters, screens, a schedule perhaps. I moved through side rooms, simple sleeping quarters, empty. A kitchen with cupboards open as if someone had left in a hurry. A shelf of mugs, all identical, each painted with the empty circle logo. In one room I found a stack of notebooks. My pulse jumped, ridiculous hope. They were blank, every page pristine, untouched. A small printed instruction sheet sat on top. Please do not journal during your stay. Let experience be experience. Narrative is a net. The phrase hit me like a shove. Narrative is a net. I'd heard something like that in meditation circles. Don't cling to story. Don't trap yourself in your own interpretation. But written here, in clean font, it felt less like wisdom and more like policy. I left the main buildings and headed toward the windowless outbuilding. The hum grew louder as I approached, vibrating faintly in my teeth. The door was metal with a keypad, no handle, a newish security system on a defunct property. Interesting. I crouched and examined the conduit, thick, well-insulated. Whoever had built this had planned for longevity. I didn't have the luxury of a warrant. I had the luxury of being a private citizen in a country where property rights were sacred until they weren't. I walked around the building looking for flaws, a vent, a seam, a place where maintenance required access. Behind the structure, half hidden by ferns, was a panel secured by a simple latch. Sometimes secrets are protected by paranoia. Sometimes they're protected by laziness. I opened it. Inside was a maintenance access to the electrical system and a conduit of fiber cable running into the ground. Next to it, a small black box with a logo on it, the empty circle, a local node. My skin prickled with an old, almost forgotten sensation. The thrill of finding a rare book in an unexpected place. The sense that the universe had briefly arranged itself into meaning. I pulled out my phone and took photos. Then, because I am both cautious and impulsive in ways that ruin my sleep, I connected a portable network tap to the fiber line. If the building was still active, it might be talking to something else. My phone's screen lit with data. Packets. Encrypted, of course, but the handshake protocol was visible. A custom tunnel, not corporate standard. The kind of thing built by someone who wanted control. I stared at the lines of code and felt the way I sometimes do when reading a foreign language. I could see the structure, the grammar, even if the meaning was hidden. Then I heard footsteps. I froze, holding my breath in the fern shadow. Someone walked around the corner, slow and unhurried. Not a guard running to catch a trespasser, but a person moving like they belonged. He was tall, lean, wearing a simple grey jacket and boots scuffed with mud. His hair was tied back in a knot that looked like it had been tied without a mirror. He held no weapon, no flashlight. Just his hands empty. He saw me crouched by the open panel and didn't look surprised. "Hi," he said, as if I were a guest who'd gotten lost. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. "Hello," I said, and my voice sounded too loud in the forest. He looked at my hands, at the network tap, at my phone. Then he looked at my face with an expression that made my stomach drop. Recognition, not of me as a person, but of me as a category. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "That makes two of us," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Fair." "Who are you?" I asked. "Name's Kaito," he said. "I used to run systems here when it was open." "It's still drawing power," I said, gesturing toward the building. "So either it's not as defunct as everyone thinks, or someone forgot to turn off their enlightenment." His smile faded. "It's drawing power because there are things inside that shouldn't be unplugged," he said quietly. "Like what?" I asked. He looked past me into the trees, as if listening for something deeper than sound. "Like the years people left behind," he said. My throat tightened. "You know about the missing time." Kato's gaze came back to mine, sharp now. "I know a lot about it," he said. "Enough to tell you this. If you open that door, you're not just trespassing on property." He nodded toward the outbuilding. "You're trespassing on consent." I thought of Elliot's signature on a waiver he didn't remember signing. "I'm already there," I said. Kaito's eyes flicked to the logo on my notebook, where I'd drawn it absent-mindedly earlier. The incomplete circle. "Do you know what an archivist is?" he asked suddenly. "A person who keeps records," I said. His mouth twisted. Here it meant something else. The wind shifted, and for a moment the smell of sandalwood was so strong it made my eyes water. Kaito's voice dropped. "The archivist was the one who held the keys," he said. "The one who kept what people chose not to carry." I stared at him. "Where is this archivist now?" He hesitated just long enough to betray himself. Then he said, "Gone." The word landed heavy. Gone like the retreat's reputation. Gone like Elliot's year. "Tell me," I demanded, and my voice surprised me with its roughness. "Tell me what this place did." Kaito studied me, and something in his face softened, not into pity, but into resignation. "You're Mara Vale," he said. "Yes," I said, wary. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a hypothesis. "Of course you are," he murmured. "What does that mean?" I asked, and a cold thread ran through my chest. Kaito looked at the outbuilding again. "It means," he said, "that you should be the last person asking that question." Catalogue. Back at my motel, I couldn't sleep. The room was generic in a way that felt hostile. Beige carpet, laminated wood, a painting of a beach that could have been anywhere. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands as if they might contain answers in their lines. Kaito's words looped in my mind like a stuck record. You should be the last person asking that question. I'd met many men who tried to unsettle me with implication, with insinuation that I didn't know myself. Kaito hadn't done it like that. There'd been no threat in his tone, just an odd certainty, like he'd looked at me and seen a label I couldn't. I opened my laptop and searched my own name with the desperate thoroughness of someone looking for an obituary. Public records, my library employment history, my investigator license, a few mentions in local news when I'd spoken at a cognitive rights panel. Nothing. Then I searched for Vastlands archivist. Nothing obvious. The retreat had scrubbed itself well. I pulled up a cached copy of their old website and combed it like a fragile manuscript. Most of it was marketing. The kind of language that makes you feel like your suffering is an inefficiency you can outsource. But buried in a FAQ section, I found a phrase that made my stomach twist. Where do my memories go if I choose to release them? They are held in compassionate stewardship by our archivist and may be returned upon request during your integration window. Compassionate stewardship, like a library loan policy. I copied the line into my notebook and underlined it until the paper tore. Held by our archivist. Not stored in our servers, not encrypted in our vault, held by a person. I thought of Dr. Salazar's article about externalized recall and mnemonic transfer. Of her words, if someone built a retreat around forgetting, they would have needed an architect. I thought of my own past, not my childhood, not my education. Those memories were intact, boringly so. But the last few years, I'd been living alone, working cases, practicing meditation inconsistently, trying not to become the sort of person whose life is nothing but work and survival. Nothing about that suggested I'd been someone's archivist, unless of course it did, and I simply couldn't see it. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed again, another voicemail, another voice. This one was older, rougher. Mara, the voice said, and the use of my first name felt like a hand on the back of my neck. It's Rinchen. I don't know if you remember me. I heard you've been asking about Vastlands. Please stop, or if you can't stop, come see me first, before you open doors that don't close. The voice ended with a soft sound, maybe a bell, maybe a breath. I replayed it, and something in my chest tightened in recognition so sharp it made me gasp. Rinchen. The name lit a small flare in my mind, a shaved head, a laugh that came from deep in the belly, hands smelling faintly of cedar smoke. An image, not a memory, a fragment. I didn't remember Rinchen, but my body did. The next morning I drove south toward a small Buddhist center listed under the name Rinchen had used. It was in a town that smelled like eucalyptus and seaweed, in a converted house with a garden full of stones arranged, as if they were in conversation. A bell rang as I entered. The air inside was cool and smelled like tea. A man in his 60s stood by a table of books, arranging them with the quiet precision of someone who respected paper. He wore simple robes and glasses that made his eyes look larger, kinder. He turned when he heard me, and his face changed, subtle, immediate, like a photograph developing. Mara, he said. I swallowed. Venerable Rinchen? He smiled. Just Rinchen, he said. I left the title behind with other costumes. He gestured for me to sit. We sat across from each other on cushions, and I felt awkward, tall, too full of limbs. It's hard to sit on the floor when you're carrying a case in your spine. I got your voicemail, I said. He nodded. I wondered if you would. I don't remember you, I said bluntly. Rinchen's gaze didn't flicker. No, he said softly. I didn't think you would. A cold sensation spread through my hands. I've never been to Vastlands, I said, and even as I said it, the certainty felt brittle. Rinchen poured tea into 2 small cups, his movements slow, deliberate. How many people have come to you with missing time? He asked. 2 in the last week, I said. A few in the past years. Rinchen nodded, as if ticking off numbers in his mind. It's starting, he murmured. What is? I asked. He looked at me, and his eyes were suddenly fierce, like a flame inside a lantern. The shelf life, he said. Of forgetting. I stared. Explain. Rinchen took a sip of tea. Vastlands was built on a misunderstanding, he said. A well-intentioned one, perhaps. The misunderstanding that suffering is an object you can remove. Buddhism doesn't say that, I said, surprising myself. It says you can change your relationship to suffering. Rinchen smiled faintly. Yes, but modern people love shortcuts. They hear "let go" and think it means delete. I leaned forward. What did they do there? Rinchen's fingers tightened around his cup. They used VR to create environments of emptiness, he said. White spaces, infinite halls. They guided people through meditations while their nervous systems were monitored, heart rate variability, breath, eye movement, EEG. They called it neuroadaptive Dharma. The phrase made my skin crawl and my curiosity flare. They used the headsets not just for visuals, I said. They were collecting brain data. Yes, Rinchen said. And they used stimulation, sound, vibration, later, more invasive methods. Ultrasound, I asked, and his eyebrows lifted slightly at my knowledge. He nodded reluctantly. There was a helmet, he said. It fit over the VR rig. They said it was for relaxation. They said it would help the mind stop clinging. And people forgot, I said. Rinchen's eyes softened. People wanted to forget, he corrected. Some came with trauma. Some came with shame. Some came with grief they thought would drown them. He looked down at his tea. They were offered a way to loosen the binding, to weaken the emotional charge by reactivating the memory in a safe environment, while the brain was pliable. Reconsolidation, I murmured. Rinchen nodded. They didn't use that word around participants. They used words like release and compassion. He looked up. Some people felt lighter, some people found peace, and some lost more than they intended. Years, I said. Rinchen's mouth tightened. The program expanded, he said. At first it was targeted. Specific memories, specific wounds. But then people asked for more. They wanted to forget relationships, careers, entire selves. He shook his head. They believed the self was an illusion, and so they treated it like an app to uninstall. And the archivist, I asked. The word felt strange in my mouth now, like a foreign syllable. Rinchen's gaze held mine. The archivist was the safeguard, he said, the one who ensured consent, the one who held what was released so it could be returned if the person chose. He paused, and his voice lowered. The archivist was also the one who made sure no one else could access what was surrendered. By holding it, I said slowly. Personally. Rinchen's eyes flicked to my hands, then back to my face. Yes, he said. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I'm here because two people are missing years, I said. And I think Vastlands is still running something. There's power. There's a live fiber line. Rinchen's face tightened. There is an archive that was never dismantled, he said, because dismantling it would be killing something, not a person, but a trust. Where is the archivist? I asked, and my voice sounded thin. Rinchen stared at me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, You don't remember, do you? My mouth went dry. Remember what? Rinchen reached into a drawer beside him and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it carefully like a sacred text. Inside was a token identical to Elliot's, but this one had a thin crack running through the logo like a fault line. Rinchen held it out. You gave this to me, he said. I stared at it. My fingers hovered, then touched it. Warm. Something opened in my mind. Not a memory, not a scene, but a sensation. My own voice saying, Keep this safe. If I disappear, it means I chose to. I jerked my hand back as if the token had burned me. Rinchen watched me with something like sorrow. You were there, he said, not as a participant, as staff, as the archivist. No, I whispered automatically, the word rising like a reflex. Rinchen's voice was gentle but relentless. You were the person who cared about records, he said, about consent forms, about return policies. You argued with Sonia about what it meant to hold a memory. You said memories were not possessions, but responsibilities. I swallowed hard. Who is Sonia? Rinchen's gaze sharpened. Dr. Sonia Ivers, he said. Founder of Vastlands, neuroscientist, practitioner, visionary. His mouth twisted. And a person capable of doing harm while believing she was doing good. My head felt full of static. I don't remember any of this, I said, and the words sounded like a confession. Rinchen nodded. That was the point, he said softly. You asked to forget. Why would I? Rinchen leaned forward. Because you believed, he said, that if you remembered, you would be tempted to interfere. With what? With the archive. With the people's choice to let go. With the suffering you were holding. My breath caught. Holding. The word landed in my chest like weight. I stood abruptly, the room tilting slightly as my blood rushed. I need to see it, I said. Rinchen didn't stop me. He only said, if you go back, go with mindfulness, not with hunger. Hunger for what? I snapped, and my voice broke. Rinchen's eyes were steady. Hunger to fill your own emptiness with answers, he said. That hunger is the root of most violence. I left the center with Rinchen's cracked token in my pocket and a new kind of fear in my skin. If I had been the archivist, if I had asked to forget, then my investigation was not just about Elliot and Sana. It was about me, and I was no longer sure whether I was looking for stolen years, or for the ones I had already taken, circulation. Kaito met me at the edge of the retreat road 2 days later. He was leaning against an old electric truck, arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting in a place where time didn't matter. You spoke to Rinchen, he said. How do you know? I started, then stopped. Of course he knew. People from retreats always had networks. Sangha wasn't just a spiritual term. It was logistics. I know because he asked me to tell you not to do anything stupid, Kaito said. I'm already doing stupid things, I replied, and my voice sounded tired, even to me. Kaito's gaze flicked to the token in my hand. That one's cracked, he said. Rinchen kept it, I said. He said I gave it to him. Kaito didn't look surprised. You did, he said. I swallowed. Tell me what you remember about me, I demanded. Kaito hesitated, then said, You don't want my version, you want yours. I want something, I snapped, because right now my brain feels like a catalogue that's been shuffled. Kaito's expression softened a fraction. You were meticulous, he said, annoyingly so. You made us document everything. You refused to let Sonia run sessions without signed, comprehended consent. Not just signatures, comprehension checks. You would sit with participants and ask them to explain what they were agreeing to in their own words. I felt a strange ache behind my eyes, like tears trying to find a path through unfamiliar tissue. That sounds like me, I whispered. Kaito nodded. It was you, he said. You also didn't trust the tech. You didn't believe forgetting could be clean. You said there would always be residue. He looked toward the outbuilding. And then you agreed to be the archivist. Why would a librarian agree to hold other people's memories? I asked, voice shaking. Kaito's gaze was steady. Because you believed in return policies, he said. The words hit me harder than they should have. He gestured toward the retreat. Come, he said. If you're going to open doors, at least do it with someone who knows where the wires are. We walked together through the trees. The outbuilding hummed. The air felt charged, not electrically but emotionally, like a room where people had cried and then left. Kaito entered a code into the keypad. The door clicked, then hissed open. Inside, the temperature dropped. The smell was clean, filtered. The room was lit by strips of cool white light. Racks of servers lined the walls, their indicator lights blinking in patterns that looked almost like breathing. In the center of the room was something I hadn't expected, a chair. Not a normal chair. It looked like a dentist's chair married to a meditation cushion. There were straps, there was a headrest, and above it, suspended on an articulated arm, was a VR rig unlike any consumer device. Lightweight, sleek, with modules positioned at the temples and behind the ears. A second arm held what looked like a ring of transducers, small, evenly spaced, like a crown. Ultrasound. My mouth went dry. "This is for stimulation," I said, stating the obvious. Kaito nodded. "Low-intensity focused ultrasound," he said. TFUS. Targeted, deep. Sonia loved it because it sounded gentle. "Sound waves," she'd say, "like chanting for neurons." I stared at the chair. "People sat here," I said. "Yes," Kaito said quietly. "They sat here and relived what they wanted to let go of." "And then?" I asked. Kaito's gaze flicked to the servers. "And then the memory would be reindexed," he said. Reindexed. The librarian word in this cold room felt obscene. "How?" I asked. Kaito took a breath. "It wasn't erasure," he said. "That's not really possible with current tech. Not cleanly. You can dampen emotional salience. You can interfere with consolidation. But a whole years, would require something else." "Externalization," I murmured. Kaito nodded. "Sonia called it the archive," he said. "She believed memories could be held outside the self, like teachings held in a monastery library. Participants could choose to release a segment of autobiographical narrative. The engrams would remain in the brain, but the retrieval keys, the context bindings, would be detached. "Detached and stored," I said. Kaito looked at me. "Stored and held," he corrected softly. "By the archivist." My throat tightened. "How does a person hold retrieval keys?" I asked, fighting panic with curiosity. Kaito walked to a shelf and pulled out a small device, an old-fashioned tablet, thick and heavy. "Part of it was digital," he said, "encrypted memory maps, but the real key wasn't code." He pointed to the VR rig. Eye tracking, EEG heart rhythms, breath. The system built an individualized mnemonic signature for each participant, patterns associated with their autobiographical recall. It wasn't mind reading, it was more like recognizing the shape of someone's remembering. "And then," I said slowly, "the archivist's signature was used as a gate." Kaito's eyes held mine. "Yes," he said. My hands went cold. "So the memories couldn't be accessed without the archivist." "Exactly," Kaito said. "Privacy by embodiment. Sonia thought it was poetic." "And if the archivist disappeared," I said, voice tight, "the memories would be inaccessible." Kaito didn't answer immediately. He moved to the servers and tapped one of the racks. "The archive is here," he said. "But it's not just here." I looked at him. Kaito's voice lowered. "There's also a neuroprosthetic component," he said, "a hippocampal interface, not implanted in participants, too invasive, too risky, but in the archivist." The room seemed to tilt. "No," I whispered. Kaito's gaze was gentle now, which somehow made it worse. "You volunteered," he said. My hand went to the back of my ear, an unconscious gesture, and my fingertips brushed a small ridge of scar tissue I'd never questioned. It had always been there, I told myself. A childhood accident, a piercing gone wrong. Now it felt like a door. "I don't remember an implant," I said, and the word sounded absurd in the cold air. "That's because you asked to forget," Kaito said. "You wanted the archive to be safe. You didn't trust Sonia. You didn't trust yourself. You said the only secure vault was one whose location even the keeper couldn't recall." My stomach turned. "So I'm carrying their years," I whispered. Kaito didn't deny it. He just said, "Some of them. Enough." I sank onto a stool, the metal cold through my jeans. My mind raced, grabbing at science like a railing. Hippocampal prostheses existed in primitive forms, models that could mimic the input-output transformations of hippocampal circuits, helping with encoding. There were experiments with memory enhancement in epilepsy patients with intracranial electrodes. There were computational models that approximated how patterns were transformed in CA3, how they were bound and replayed. It wasn't science fiction anymore. It was early, messy, but real. But Vastlands. Vastlands had taken it and wrapped it in incense. How do you transfer a memory index from one person to another? I asked, voice shaky. Kaito's eyes flicked to the chair. Synchronous entrainment, he said. VR helps because it can synchronize sensory input. Two people in the same environment with matching stimuli. Then you use neurostimulation to align rhythms, theta, gamma, the hippocampal cortical coupling that's involved in encoding and retrieval. You create a window where the brain is plastic, where bindings can be rewritten. And you pair the participants' recall cues with the archivist's signature, I said slowly. So when they try to retrieve, their brain reaches toward me. Kaito nodded. I felt suddenly nauseated, not because of the science, but because of the intimacy of it. People's lives tethered to my nervous system like library books checked out and never returned. And why are they coming to me now? I asked. Why Elliot? Why Sana? Why now? Kaito's jaw tightened. Because the archive is degrading, he said. The servers are aging, the prosthetic interface is aging, and there's a timer. A timer, I repeated. Kaito looked at the racks. 15 years, he said. That was the policy. After the integration window, participants could request return for a set period. After that, the memories would be destroyed permanently. Sonia called it final release. My throat closed. Destroyed how? I demanded. Kaito hesitated. By severing the last retrieval keys, he said. By collapsing the index. It would be like burning the catalogue. The books might still exist, scattered, but no one could find them again, not even you. I stared at him, horrified. And when is the timer up? I asked. Kaito's gaze held mine. Soon, he said, for the earliest cohorts. Elliot's year, Sana's 14 months, the missing mother's pregnancy, the man's Taiwan. These weren't isolated cases, they were loans coming due, and I, Mara Vale, former librarian, reluctant investigator, was the due date. Weeding. There is a moment in every long investigation when the mystery stops being an external puzzle and becomes a mirror. I didn't want to be the archivist, not because the role sounded sinister, though it did, but because it meant my life had been shaped by a choice I couldn't remember making. Consent without memory is a special kind of cruelty, even when you consent to it. Kaito offered to leave, to give me space to think. I told him no. If I was going to open this, I wasn't going to do it alone in a room full of humming machines. I need to see what's in there, I said. Kaito's expression tightened. The VR environment, he asked. Yes. He sighed. You'll need the rig, he said. And you'll need to be careful. Careful how? I asked, though I could guess. Reconsolidation, he said. Even now, if your implant is active, interacting with the archive could reactivate bindings. You could start retrieving other people's years, not as stories, as felt experiences. I swallowed. Like involuntary empathy, I said. Kaito's mouth twisted. Empathy without boundaries, he said. It can break you. I thought of Buddhism's insistence on boundaries of practice. You don't dive into suffering without grounding, without refuge. Compassion without wisdom becomes drowning. I looked at the chair. I want to do it, I said. Kaito studied me. Then we do it with protocol, he said. He moved with practiced efficiency, powering up systems, checking diagnostics. The VR rig came alive with a soft whir, lenses adjusting. I noticed the tiny details, the way the headset's eye-tracking modules calibrated with infrared pulses, the way the system asked for interpupillary distance, the way it measured my blink rate. It wasn't a consumer device. It wasn't just rendering pretty worlds. It was watching me back. Kaito attached the ultrasound crown. It won't stimulate unless the system detects recall state, he said. Closed loop. That was your insistence back then. No open-loop zapping. You made Sonia build safeguards. Back then, I echoed, and the phrase tasted bitter. He handed me a small sensor strap for my wrist. Heart rate, he said. If you spike, we pull you out. And if I don't want to come out? I asked. Kaito's gaze sharpened. Then I pull you out anyway, he said. Consent doesn't mean suicidal curiosity. I managed a humorless smile. Spoken like a systems engineer, I said. He snorted. Spoken like someone who's seen what happens when people treat brains like software. I sat in the chair. The straps felt invasive and oddly comforting, like being held in place so I wouldn't drift. Kaito lowered the headset over my eyes. Darkness, then light. A soft chime rang, clear and familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. The sound of a meditation bell. The tone hit a place in my body that recognized it before my mind did. A voice spoke in my ears, calm, genderless, neither human nor fully synthetic. Welcome back, Archivist. My breath caught. The world formed around me. Not a beach, not a forest, a library. It wasn't any library I'd ever worked in, though it had echoes. Endless shelves, high ceilings, warm pools of light. The architecture shifted subtly as I looked, like it was being generated in real time based on my expectations. There were no windows, yet the air felt sunlit. The shelves were made of dark wood and seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. Instead of books, the shelves held small, translucent spheres, each glowing faintly from within. They pulsed like slow breathing. A memory library. I turned, and the floor beneath me was a mosaic of call numbers. 150, psychology. 294, Buddhism. 004, computer science. The Dewey Decimal System, rendered in stone like scripture. Of course I would build a metaphor I couldn't resist. A figure stood at the end of the aisle, half in shadow. As I walked toward it, my steps made no sound. The figure resolved into a woman wearing simple clothes. Black pants, grey sweater, hair pulled back. She looked like me, but not exactly. Her eyes were too steady, too unburdened. An avatar or a memory of myself. She smiled. "You came back," she said, and her voice was my own. "What is this?" I whispered. She tilted her head. "This is the archive," she said. "You built it to hold what others could not." "I don't remember building it," I said, anger rising like bile. The avatar's smile didn't change. "That was part of the contract," she said gently. "You asked me to forget so I could hold without attachment." A Buddhist concept twisted into a security feature. "Where are Eliot's memories?" I demanded. "Where is Sana's year?" The avatar gestured down the aisle. "They are shelved," she said. "By date, by narrative segment, by emotional valence, if you prefer. You were always meticulous." I wanted to grab her, to shake her, but my hands passed through her like mist. "Why are people losing whole years?" I said. "Why aren't their memories returning?" The avatar's gaze softened. "Because the return window is closing," she said. "Because the archive is destabilizing, and because you have been tired." "Tired," I echoed. "You have been holding too much," she said. "The body is not an infinite storage device, Mara, not even with a prosthesis." The shelves around us pulsed, and for a moment I felt a pressure behind my eyes, like 1,000 unspoken stories pressing against a thin wall. I backed away. "I'm not going to carry this," I said. I didn't agree. "You did," the avatar said, not unkindly. "But you also built a way out." She pointed to a space in the library where a table sat beneath a hanging lamp, a reading desk. On the desk was a ledger, thick and old-fashioned, like a circulation record. Above it, in neat letters, "Return Policy." I walked to the desk. The ledger opened under my hands. Names, dates, segments, notes in my own handwriting. Elliot Park, release 2021, full year. Reason, burnout/shame/desire for emptiness. Return eligible until 2036. Sana Roy, release, October 2020 to December 2021, 14 months. Reason, grief/rupture/self-harm risk. Return eligible until 2036. And there were so many more. Hundreds. Thousands. Each entry had a note: participant comprehension verified, voluntary, integration plan discussed. I stared until my vision blurred. The avatar stood behind me. "You wanted it done right," she said softly. "You were the one who insisted on choice." "And yet here we are," I said, voice raw. "People are missing years and they don't remember choosing." The avatar's silence was heavy. Finally, she said, "Would you remember choosing to let go of pain?" I turned to her, furious. "Yes," I snapped. "If it was my choice, I'd want to remember that I chose it." The avatar's gaze held mine. "Would you?" she asked. And there was something sharp now, something like the edge of a koan. "Or would you feel compelled to reclaim what you released, simply because the self hates gaps?" I couldn't answer. My mind scrambled for certainty and found none. The library hummed softly. The spheres on the shelves pulsed. "Where is Sonia?" I asked suddenly. "Dr. Ivers, the founder." The avatar's expression flickered, so fast it could have been a rendering artifact. "She is not in the archive," she said. "Is she dead?" I demanded. The avatar hesitated. "Not in the way you mean," she said. My skin prickled. "What does that mean?" The avatar walked toward an aisle marked 294.3, the category for Buddhist doctrine. She reached toward a shelf and touched a sphere that glowed darker than the rest. "This," she said, "is yours." "My memory," I whispered. The sphere pulsed under her fingers like a heart. I backed away. "No," I said, "I don't want—" "You came here," the avatar said gently. "You opened the door. The archive responds to intention." I thought of Rinchen's warning. Go with mindfulness, not hunger. But hunger was what I had. Hunger for answers. Hunger to fill the hole in my story. "What happens if I take it?" I asked, voice trembling. The avatar's gaze softened. "Then you remember," she said, "and you understand why you asked not to." "And if I don't?" I asked. "Then the archive will continue to leak," she said. "Participants will lose access permanently, and you will continue to carry what you cannot name." The choice hung between us like incense smoke. I reached out and touched the sphere. It dissolved into my hand like warm water, and suddenly I was not in the library anymore. Embodiment! I was in a room full of white, not blank, not empty. The kind of white that has depth, that makes shadows meaningful. The room stretched infinitely, without walls or corners. Above me, a sky of soft light with no source. In the center of the space stood Dr. Sonia Ivers. I recognized her without ever having seen her in my remembered life. That recognition was the strangest part, my mind slotting her into place like a catalogue entry that had always existed. She wore simple clothes, like a meditation teacher, but her eyes were bright with the restless intelligence of someone who'd spent decades turning questions into experiments. "Mara," she said, and her voice wrapped around my name like a familiar scarf. "You're here," I said, and the words came out as if I'd been waiting to say them. Sonia smiled faintly. "Where else would I be?" she asked. I looked around. "This is VR," I said. "The archive environment." "Yes," Sonia said. "We called it the stacks. You insisted on the metaphor." I felt a surge of anger that had nowhere to land. "You made people lose years," I said. Sonia's gaze was steady. "People asked," she said. "They begged. They came with stories that were eating them alive. They came with shame they could not metabolize." "And you offered deletion," I spat. "I offered release," she said sharply. "There's a difference." "Not to the people who can't remember their own lives," I said. Sonia's eyes narrowed. "Do you remember why you came here?" she asked. I opened my mouth, and nothing came. The memory was there, like a shape behind frosted glass, but I couldn't reach it. Sonia stepped closer. "You were a librarian," she said. "You believed in preservation, in access, in the right to know. And then you watched people suffer from what they knew, from what they could not stop remembering. A flash. A young man in a library computer lab shaking, hands pressed to his temples. A woman sobbing quietly over a printed eviction notice. A child staring at a screen that replayed violence in an endless loop. Memory as weapon, knowledge as trauma. Sonia's voice was soft now. "You started asking the same question I did," she said. "What if forgetting could be chosen? What if the mind could be granted the same mercy we grant our devices? Archiving, compression, letting go. And at what cost?" I said, though the words felt like they were coming from someone else. Sonia smiled without humor. "At the cost of the story you tell about yourself," she said. "At the cost of continuity, which Buddhism would argue is already illusory." I felt my chest tighten. "You used Buddhism to sell neuroscience," I said. Sonia's gaze sharpened. "No," she said. "I used neuroscience to make Buddhism tangible for people who couldn't sit still with their pain." I remembered suddenly vividly a room full of participants in headsets, sitting on cushions, the VR environment overlaying a vast empty hall, a voice guiding them, "Notice the thought, let it pass, do not grasp." And beneath the VR, beneath the calm visual field, a layer of data, EEG, pupil dilation, heart rate, feeding into an algorithm that adjusted the environment, the sound, the timing. A system designed to catch the mind when it reached for pain. Sonia's voice continued. "We didn't erase engrams," she said. "We didn't burn the books. We removed the catalog entries that made the suffering easily retrievable. We loosened the binding between pain and identity." "And then you stored the catalog in me," I said, and my voice shook. Sonia's eyes softened. "You volunteered," she said. "You believed in compassionate stewardship." "Did I?" I demanded. "Or did you persuade me?" Sonia's gaze held mine like a test. "Remember," she said. The white room shifted, and suddenly I was somewhere else, a smaller space. A real room, not VR. A desk, papers, my own hands signing forms. Sonia sitting across from me, her expression intense. "You don't have to do this," Sonia had said. "I do," my past self replied, voice firm. "Because if you hold the keys, Sonia, you'll eventually rationalize using them." Sonia's face tightened. "I'm not a villain," she said. "I know," my past self said. "That's why I'm scared." My past self leaned forward. "People have the right to forget," she said, "but they also have the right to return. The archive has to be protected from everyone, including you, including me." Sonia's gaze softened with something like admiration. "So you'll carry it," she said. My past self nodded. "Like a librarian carries rare books," she said. "Not as possessions, as trusts." "And you want to forget you're carrying them," Sonia said, incredulous. My past self smiled faintly. "Yes," she said, "because otherwise I'll cling, I'll peek, I'll judge, I'll decide for them. I need to hold without attachment." Sonia's voice dropped. "That's not how non-attachment works," she warned. My past self's smile faded. "Maybe," she said, "but it's the best I can do." The memory shifted again, later in the chair, the VR rig on my head, the ultrasound crown resting like a halo, Kaito adjusting straps, Rinchen chanting softly in the corner, low and steady, as if blessing a surgery. My past self's heart pounded, not fear, determination. A voice, maybe mine, maybe the system, said, "Archivist protocol initiated." And then a sensation like a door closing gently inside my skull. The white room returned. Sonia stood before me, watching. "You did it," she said softly. I felt tears on my cheeks, real tears in VR, my body responding as if the scene were happening now. My implant, my brain, my nervous system. None of it cared about the difference between past and present. Reconsolidation didn't care about narrative neatness. "You didn't stop," I said suddenly, the realization rising like a wave. "After I forgot, you didn't stop." Sonia's eyes flickered. "We continued," she said, "because people needed it, because the world was unbearable." "And then Vastlands shut down," I said. "Why?" Sonia's mouth tightened. Because someone tried to steal the archive, she said. A corporation, a defense contractor disguised as a wellness investor. They wanted the memory data, the recall signatures, everything we'd built, not for compassion, for persuasion. My stomach dropped. Weaponized memory, I whispered. Sonia nodded once. They wanted to build experiences that could overwrite political convictions, make soldiers forget guilt, make consumers forget dissatisfaction. They wanted voluntary forgetting without voluntariness. I clenched my fists. So what did you do? I demanded. Sonia's gaze held mine. I hid, she said simply. In the archive, I realized. Sonia's smile was sad. In you, she corrected. I staggered, the white space tilting. You put yourself in my head, I said, voice breaking. You tethered your own memories to my implant. You used me as a vault. Sonia's eyes were steady. Yes, she said, because you were the only vault they couldn't hack. My anger flared, sharp and hot. You didn't have my consent for that, I said. Sonia didn't flinch. No, she admitted. I didn't. And that's why you erased yourself again. That's why you chose to become a former librarian investigator instead of the archivist. You built an amnesia wall because you knew I would try to justify my choices. The white room hummed softly. You're a memory, I said, voice hollow. A construct. Sonia tilted her head. A pattern, she said. An engram scaffold. Enough of me to continue the work or to end it. And what do you want now? I asked. Sonia's gaze softened. I want you to choose, she said. Not for me, for them, for yourself. The timer is coming. Either you return what you hold or you let it dissolve. Either you restore suffering or you preserve emptiness. My chest ached. If I return memories, I whispered, people will suffer. Sonia's voice was quiet. Yes, she said. And if you don't, they will suffer differently. They will live with holes they cannot understand, with growth severed from its roots. They will become lighter and flatter at the same time. The question hung in the white space, not as philosophy, but as a practical decision. If you erase suffering, do you also erase growth? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the question back like a burning object. Instead, I found myself asking, what happens to me if I return them? Sonia's gaze held mine. You will lose what you've been holding, she said. Not just the pain, the relationships, the small joys, the days that shaped you while you carried them. You will become less. Less, I echoed. Sonia nodded. Or more honest, she said. The white space faded as the system began to pull me out. The last thing Sonia said was not a warning or a plea. It was a question, gentle and relentless. Archivist, she said, what is your return policy for yourself? Reading room. When I removed the headset, the server room's cold air hit my face like reality's slap. Kaito watched me, eyes sharp. You were in for 5 minutes, he said. Your heart rate spiked twice. It had felt like hours. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand and found them wet. My hands trembled. Kaito, I said hoarsely. Sonia is in there. His face tightened. A construct, he said. A pattern, I corrected. Enough to speak. Kaito exhaled. Of course she is, he murmured. She'd never trust a server. I stood, unsteady. We have to return them, I said. Kaito's eyes widened slightly. All of them? He asked. I don't know if all is possible, I said, but we can't let the archive dissolve. Kaito's jaw tightened. People asked to forget, he said. They signed waivers. Some of them were desperate, some of them were dangerous. Some of them wanted to forget harm they caused. I know, I said. Consent matters. But so does the right to change your mind, the right to remember what you chose. Kaito's gaze was steady. And your consent? He asked quietly. Do you consent to becoming empty again? The question hit me in the gut. I had been carrying these years. They had become part of me, even if I hadn't known. Memories shape the nervous system, whether you call them yours or not. They influence your fear responses, your attachment patterns, the way you walk into a room and scan for threats. They become posture. If I returned them, I would lose something I couldn't name. But keeping them would be theft, even if it was once stewardship. I thought of the circulation ledger in the VR library, names and dates, my handwriting, return eligible until. A return policy is not a suggestion, it's a promise. We do it like a library, I said suddenly. Kaito blinked. What? We don't dump the entire archive back into people like a flood, I said, voice gaining strength as the plan formed. We don't hand them a year and say good luck. We create a reading room, a guided retrieval environment, with consent, with support, with integration. People can borrow their memories in doses. Kaito stared. That's actually sane, he said slowly. It's what I would have insisted on, I said, and the words felt both comforting and terrible. It's what I did insist on. Kaito's gaze softened. You're remembering, he said. Enough, I said. Over the next week, Kaito and I turned the outbuilding into something like a clinic. We brought in a portable medical monitor. I called Dr. Salazar and told her, in as few words as possible, that I'd found the source of the missing years. There was a long silence. Then she said, very quietly, You're telling me this is real? Yes, I said. Another silence. Then, I'm coming, she said. Rinchen came too, not as a scientist, but as a grounding presence. He arrived with tea, cushions, and a bell that sounded like clear water. We contacted Elliot, Sana, a handful of others from the support group. We offered them a choice. Come to a place in the woods and sit in a chair and retrieve what had been shelved, knowing it might hurt. Not everyone came. Some replied with furious messages. How dare you? Some with disbelief, some with relief so intense it felt like grief. Elliot came first. He arrived pale, jaw tight, carrying his token like a talisman. When he saw the chair and the VR rig, he froze. This is where it happened, he whispered. I don't know if you'll remember it that way, I said gently. But yes, this is where the binding was altered. Elliot swallowed. And you, he said, staring at me, you're the archivist. The word sounded absurd when applied to my body in a server room. Yes, I said. Elliot's face contorted. Anger, betrayal, fear, all at once. So you have my year, he said, voice shaking. I have the key to it, I corrected, and I'm offering it back. Elliot's hands clenched around the token. What's the catch? He demanded. No catch, I said. Just consequences. You might remember why you wanted to forget. You might regret it. You might be grateful. You might be furious. But it will be yours again. He stared at me, and his eyes filled with tears he seemed ashamed of. I don't even know who I was then, he whispered. What if I hate him? Rinchen stepped forward, voice calm. Then you will meet him like a stranger, he said, with curiosity, with kindness, with the understanding that hatred is also suffering. Elliot looked at Rinchen, then at me. If I do this, he said, voice raw, will I lose who I am now? The question hit me like a mirror. I answered honestly. Yes, I said, somewhat. Memory changes you, but so does absence. Elliot closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was a steadiness there that looked like courage's quieter sibling. Okay, he said, I want to check it out. Kaito strapped him in. Dr. Salazar monitored his vitals. Rinchen sat beside him, bell in hand. I stood behind the chair and placed my fingertips lightly on Elliot's shoulder. An anchoring touch, consented to, a human gesture in a machine room. The system powered up, the headset lowered. Elliot's eyes disappeared behind lenses. The server lights blinked. The archive hummed. In the VR environment, I watched on a secondary display, abstract, not a video of what Elliot saw, but a representation of network activity, recall signatures, theta coupling, pupil dilation data rendered as waves. The system detected recall engagement. The ultrasound crown prepared. I felt something in my own skull shift, like a lock turning. The archive recognized the request. Elliot's breathing hitched. Then, softly, he began to cry. Not wails, not drama. Just tears sliding out of his covered eyes as if a dam had been opened. Minutes passed. His heart rate spiked, then steadied. His hands clenched, then relaxed. When the session ended and the headset lifted, Elliot stared at the ceiling like someone seeing it for the first time. His face was wet. His expression was not relief, not agony. It was complex. He looked at me. "I remember," he said hoarsely. "Do you want to tell me?" I asked. Elliot swallowed. "I went to Vastlands because I was ashamed," he said. "Not of burnout, of what I did." My stomach tightened. Dr. Salazar's gaze sharpened. Kaito went still. Elliot's voice shook. "In 2020, I built a security tool," he said. "It was supposed to protect people. It got sold to a government. It got used to track activists. People got hurt. I told myself it wasn't my fault. But I knew, and I couldn't live with knowing." He laughed once, bitter. "So I paid to forget," he said. "Not to heal, to escape consequence." Rinchen's bell rang softly, a clear sound cutting through the confession like a blade of light. Elliot's eyes met mine. "But it wasn't just guilt," he said. "It was also the year I decided to change. I quit. I testified. I tried to undo harm. I met people I'd hurt and listened to them." His voice broke. "I forgot the suffering," he whispered, "and I forgot the growth. I forgot the part where I became someone I could live with." My chest ached. The question Sonia had asked, the one I couldn't shake, echoed again. "If you erase suffering, do you also erase growth?" Elliot wiped his face with shaking hands. "I don't know what to do now," he said. Dr. Salazar spoke softly. "Now you integrate," she said. "You take the memory, and you let it become part of you without letting it define you. That's the work forgetting promised you could bypass." Elliot looked at me. "You held it," he said, voice raw. "Did it hurt you?" I didn't answer immediately because the truth was complicated. It had hurt me, yes. But it had also shaped me. These borrowed years had given me empathy I hadn't earned and weight I hadn't chosen. "It will hurt less if you carry it," I said finally, "where it belongs." Twist. Over the next month, we ran the reading room like a library with fragile manuscripts. People came in pairs, sometimes with loved ones, sometimes alone. They signed new consent forms, real ones, with comprehension checks and plain language. They sat in the chair. They retrieved segments. Some stopped after a few sessions, deciding they didn't want everything back. Some asked for more, hungry for continuity. Some left furious, feeling betrayed by their past selves. Some left quiet, as if they'd been given back a part of their body. Each retrieval changed me too. I didn't just witness. The archive wasn't a neutral vault. It was a tether. Every time a memory returned to its owner, something inside my skull loosened. At first, I felt relief, like setting down boxes I hadn't known I was carrying. Then I felt fear, like a house emptying of furniture until you realize you might miss the echo. I began to have dreams that weren't mine, the taste of salty soup in a kitchen I'd never seen, the sensation of a baby's breath on my neck, the sound of Mandarin in a crowded market. And then, slowly, as the archive emptied, the dreams stopped. One evening, after Sana's 7th session, I sat alone in the main hall of the retreat. We'd cleaned it, brought in cushions, made it less like an abandoned theater. Rinchen had hung a simple cloth with the empty circle logo, cracked now like an honest symbol. Sana had left an hour ago with her retrieved 14 months. She'd walked out with a strange expression, sorrow and gratitude braided together. She had hugged me before leaving, hard, as if trying to press herself into the moment so it wouldn't slip away. Now the hall was quiet. I sat on the floor and watched dust drift through the air like tiny, slow thoughts. Kaito entered quietly and sat beside me. You okay? He asked. I nodded, then shook my head. The truth was too layered for a yes. I feel lighter, I said, and less real. Kato's gaze softened. That's what you signed up for, he said. I don't remember signing up, I said bitterly. Kaito was quiet for a moment, then he said, There's something you still haven't seen. My stomach tightened. What? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small drive. This, he said, was in the server rack, encrypted. I couldn't open it without your signature. I waited until the archive was mostly returned because I didn't want to contaminate you. He held it out. It's labeled Archivist, Final Memo. A memo, a record, a librarian's last resort. My hands trembled as I took the drive. Put it in, Kaito said. We went back to the outbuilding. The servers hummed quieter now, as if relieved. The VR rig sat on its arm like a patient animal. I sat in the chair. Kaito connected the drive. Dr. Salazar watched my vitals. Rinshin sat nearby, bell in hand. The headset lowered. Darkness, then the library again. Fewer spheres now, more empty shelves. The stacks looked used, honest. The avatar of myself stood by the reading desk, holding a small object. A book, not a sphere, not a data file. A physical book, bound in dark cloth with no title. This is for you, the avatar said, and her voice was quieter than before, almost tender. I reached for the book. My fingers closed around it. It felt real. When I opened it, I saw handwriting, my own, a letter written to myself. I read, Mara, if you're reading this, it means you did what you promised. You returned what you held. It means you chose the harder compassion, the one that doesn't confuse emptiness with absence. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for what I asked you to do to yourself, but I need you to know one thing because you will feel it and you will think you're losing your mind. You were not only holding other people's memories, you were holding yourself inside them. My breath caught. The handwriting continued. The archivist role was never neutral. Every participant needed someone to guide them, someone to witness them when they let go, someone to hold their hand when their pain resurfaced in VR, when the brain's plasticity made them vulnerable. That someone was you. You were in their missing years, not as a thief, not as a key, but as a person. You were their anchor. When you return their memories, you will return the parts of you that exist in them. They will remember you, and then they may not, because memory is not a photograph. It is a negotiation. When someone integrates a painful year, they often rewrite the cast. They focus on the story they need, not the witness who held it. You will feel yourself fading from the narratives you helped restore. This is not punishment. It is the consequence of choosing to be a steward instead of an owner. Buddhists talk about the bodhisattva who vows to stay until all beings are free. That vow is beautiful and impossible. I tried to make it a protocol. It almost killed us. If you feel lonely after, remember, you were never meant to be the archive forever. You were meant to be the librarian who teaches others how to find their own books. Return policy for yourself. Do not cling to being remembered. Do not cling to being forgotten. Just keep the doors open. M. The letter ended with a small drawing, the empty circle, cracked and then mended with a thin line of gold. Kintsugi. Repair as visible. Tears blurred my vision. Not because I was surprised. I wasn't, not fully. I'd felt the fading already in the way some participants looked through me after sessions, as if their memories were rearranging themselves around a new center. But seeing it written, seeing that my past self had anticipated it, made it real in a way that was both cruel and strangely comforting. I removed the headset. The server room came back into focus. Kaito, Dr. Salazar, Rinshin. Rinshin watched me with eyes like still water. You remembered, he said softly. I remembered, I whispered. Kaito's voice was tight. Are you okay? He asked. I laughed once, quietly. Define okay, I said. I built a system to hold other people's suffering, and in doing so, I made myself optional. Dr. Salazar's gaze was gentle. That's not optional, she said. That's service. I shook my head. Service is supposed to be sustainable, I said. Rinchen rang the bell once, clear, clean. Sustainability is wisdom, he said. Compassion without wisdom is just another form of grasping. I looked at the servers. The shelves in the VR library were emptier now, but not empty. There were still spheres, participants who hadn't come, who didn't want their memories back, who perhaps never would. What do we do about the ones who don't come? Kaito asked quietly. I stared at the chair, at the headset, at the ultrasonic crown that had been called chanting for neurons. I thought of Elliot's confession. Forgetting had erased not only guilt, but the part where he chose to change. I thought of Sana, holding her regained months like a fragile glass. I thought of the mother who might never want to remember her labor. I thought of the man who might prefer to let Taiwan stay a ghost. Choice. Return policy. No forced returns, I said finally. We don't decide for them. We keep the archive stable. We maintain it. We send notices. We make the reading room available. And if the timer runs out? Kaito asked. I looked at the cracked logo on the wall. Then we don't destroy, I said. We don't burn catalogs. We extend the policy. Dr. Salazar raised her eyebrows. You're proposing an indefinite archive, she said. Yes, I said, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. Not as a wellness product, as a public trust. A library, Rinchen murmured, and there was approval in his voice. Kaito frowned. Who funds that? He asked. I thought of my old library, of budget meetings and grant proposals, and the constant humiliating act of convincing people that knowledge mattered. We do, I said. We make it boring. We make it regulated. We put it under oversight. We make it as unsexy as a municipal archive, because secrecy is what made Vastlands dangerous. Kaito stared at me. You're going to turn an illegal memory vault into public infrastructure, he said, sounding half amused, half horrified. Yes, I said. I'm a librarian. That's what we do. We take chaos and we make it accessible. We make it accountable. Rinchen smiled. And you accept, he said, that you may not be thanked. I swallowed hard, feeling the truth of the letter in my bones. I accept, I said, and the words felt like a vow. Shelving. 6 months later, I ran into Elliot in a coffee shop in Oakland. It wasn't a dramatic scene. No rain, no swelling music. Just a line of people waiting for drinks and a wall of pastries that looked too glossy to be real. Elliot stood ahead of me, hair slightly longer, face more lined. He held a notebook and was writing something, brow furrowed. For a moment, I felt a surge of warmth, recognition, connection. I had held his year. I had watched him cry it back into himself. I had seen his face when he remembered his own attempt at repair. I stepped forward. Elliot, I said. He looked up. His eyes passed over me politely, then paused, searching. His face tightened with the effort of recall. Mara, he said slowly, uncertain. Yes, I said, and I smiled. He nodded. Hi, he said. His voice was friendly, grateful even. But the warmth I'd expected wasn't there, not in him, but in the space between us. The space had been rewritten. You look, he began, then stopped as if he couldn't find a word that fit. I look like someone you met in a year you forgot, I said, and my smile was crooked. Elliot blinked, then his eyes widened slightly, realization flickering. Oh, he said quietly, you were there. I was, I said. He swallowed. Thank you, he said, voice sincere. I mean it. That year. It was the hardest and the best. And you... He frowned, searching. You helped. I did, I said softly. He nodded again, then his gaze drifted, as if his brain was already moving on, already refiling. I'm sorry, he said, and there was genuine regret. I don't remember you the way I think I should. It's okay, I said. And to my surprise, I meant it. Because I could feel the letter's truth settling into me like dust. I had chosen to be a witness, not a character. Elliot hesitated, then smiled. This time not rehearsed, but tired and real. "Are you still doing that work?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "We opened a reading room." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "People should be able to find their own books." I laughed softly because the metaphor had made its way into him too, whether he remembered its source or not. When my coffee was ready, I took it and stepped outside. The air smelled like wet pavement and car exhaust and the faint sweetness of roasted beans. Ordinary, real. I sat on a bench and watched people walk by, each carrying a private archive in their skull, each forgetting and remembering in ways they would never fully comprehend. The mind is not a vault. It is a living library, constantly rewriting its catalogue. You can erase suffering, yes. You can dampen it, archive it, hide it in an embodied key. You can build VR temples of emptiness and call it enlightenment, but you cannot erase the fact that you were shaped. Growth is not a souvenir you keep after throwing away the trip. It is the trip. It is the blister and the laughter and the regret and the decision to keep going anyway. In Buddhism, they say the self is not a fixed thing. They say it is a process, a collection of conditions, a story we tell in order to navigate. I used to think that meant identity was flimsy, disposable. Now I think it means something else. If the self is a story, then the ethical question isn't whether you can edit it. It's whether you have the right to edit it without reading it first. I took a sip of coffee, bitter and hot, and let the sensation be exactly what it was, no more, no less. And somewhere in my skull, behind the scar that had once been a door, a quiet space remained, not emptiness as absence, but emptiness as possibility. A place where memories could return. A place where suffering could be held without being hoarded. A place where growth could be allowed to hurt. I didn't know if I would be remembered for it. But I knew the doors were open.